You've just checked in to Sweet Success. Join me, Katie Cline, for exclusive conversations with hotel executives, hospitality leaders, and industry innovators. Together, we'll uncover the strategies and techniques these masters of hospitality relentlessly refine. Whether you're already in the industry or just starting out, tune in every week to unlock the secret to your sweet success. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Sweet Success. I'm your host, Katie Cline, and we have a very special episode for you all today. We are recording directly from Skift Global Forum, the premier thought leadership conference covering the business of global travel. And joining me for our first ever in-person interview is Phil McAveety, CEO of Iberostar Hotels and Resorts. Before joining Iberostar, he held senior leadership roles at some of the world's most recognizable brands, including Nike and, of course, Starwood Hotels and Resorts, where I first met him. With a truly global perspective spanning Europe, Asia Pacific, and the US, Phil brings invaluable insights on what it takes to innovate, evolve, and lead in hospitality today. Phil, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I don't know how to react to that introduction.
This is why you always keep a publicist on hand.
Oh, yeah.
Just, I can say that, and then you walk into the room.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Well, welcome back to New York.
Thank
I
you.
know you lived here for 7 years when you were working for Starwood. How does it feel to be back?
Hey, it's always great to be back. I've always loved New York, living here for all those years. My main feeling right now, though, is one of jet lag.
Yeah.
As I said, I always find that after the second night is the worst day, but I guess I can't complain too much because I understand you have a small baby at home. So my jet lag pales into insignificance.
You know, he was only up once last night, so I think you still win. Do you have any crazy jet lag hacks?
I do not. Just
Okay.
Suffer.
Great. Perfect.
Pound
we'll be
through.
at the coffee bar later together then. You are now based in Mallorca.
I am indeed.
You're at the helm, obviously, of Grupo Iberostar's hotel division. This isn't the first time you've lived in Mallorca, but New York, Palma, those seem like two very different places to live. Are they?
Yeah, look, they're very different, but I think no matter where you live in the world, I think you build, you find your neighborhood, you build your community.
Yeah.
And to some degree, it doesn't really matter whether you're living in, potentially the capital of the world or New York or Palma de Mallorca, which has, sort of 450, 500,000 people.
Wow.
You find your way. It normally takes you 6 months to a year to really get yourself established.
Yeah.
And you've got to get through that period.
Yes.
But no, it's clearly the energy, the grit of New York, you can't really compare. But there's pros and cons on both sides with big cities, small cities, etc.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you just said about 6 months to a year. When I moved to the UK, a friend of mine said exactly that to me. Give yourself a year. And it was really until that year mark that I felt like, oh, I found my feet. I found my neighborhood. I know my coffee shop. You have that routine.
And you found your people.
You found your
which is the most
people.
important thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You grew up in London. You've lived in 7 different countries around the world. Obviously the UK, the US, Spain, Portugal, Hong Kong, the Netherlands, and Australia. I mean, that's really such a global perspective right there. How has living in all of those places shaped not only you as a leader, but you as a person?
Yeah, look, there was no great plan to move around the world.
Really?
No, there was no great plan. In fact, the very first time I got on an aeroplane was to go and work in Portugal. And the second time I got on an aeroplane was to go and work in Hong Kong.
When you went to Portugal, how old were you?
I was 23, 24.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that
So
was
look,
from London.
It was from London, yeah. And I grew up there. Look, we would go back to Ireland my family's Irish, we'd go back to Ireland when I was small, but we'd take the boat backwards and forwards. That was the way it was done in those days. I'm saying it's quite Dickensian, isn't it? Like, taking the boat
The
backwards
horse and buggy to the boat.
It wasn't quite that. I'm not that old, although my kids seem to think I am. So there was no great plan. But I was given the opportunity at that age. And sometimes you get very, very lucky that you meet people who give you opportunities, but then you have to take the risk.
Yeah.
And frankly, I was a little scared to go to Portugal. I was a little naive going to Hong Kong. Hong Kong I felt comfortable about because in my ignorance, I thought it was just very, very far East London, that it was still part of the extended UK, British Overseas Territory at the time.
Sure.
And then, of course, I get there, having never been there, and I'm in China.
Wow.
And, away from friends, away from family, away from connections, I think every day for the first 6 months, I just wanted to go home.
Yeah.
But my pride wouldn't let me. And then
I love that.
it was I could have called and gone home. But it tests you. It means you have to build new networks, which you really hadn't had to do without a formal context of being in school or being in college or being in your hometown.
Right.
And then going from country to country, you have to clearly reestablish yourself every time, open up to new ways of thinking, new ways of working.
Yeah.
And you learn an awful lot about yourself, and you learn an awful lot about the world. But ultimately, what I've discovered, because I'm now fortunate to have friends from all of those countries.
You kind of collect them along the way, I imagine.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is you get to the sense of if we could all speak one language, we'd probably have more in common across generations. I remember having a conversation many years ago in a bar in Tokyo with a Japanese friend of mine and a Chinese friend of mine, and we were all of a certain age. We were all unmarried at the time, and basically comparing the stories of our three mothers. Basically had the same thing: is like, when are you going to settle down? When are you going to do this? And I thought, a Chinese mother, an Irish mother, and a Japanese mother, and you put them in the same room, and they
sounds like a joke. A Chinese mother and Irish mother all walk into a bar,
but they would all be saying the same things. When are you going to settle down? When are you going to stop doing this crazy, rampaging around the world?
Yeah.
So look, I've just been very, very fortunate that opportunities came along. And I've just kind of said, hey, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
I mean, I'll go. And
what was it that pulled you to Portugal?
Actually, it was, again, one of those fortunate things. You meet people in your career who become, mentors or advocates. My first role was in an advertising agency, and about 3 years in.
In Portugal?
No, in London.
Okay.
In London. And about 3 years in, as is the way in the advertising world, I'm sure it's the same in the US, people move between agencies. I was offered a job in another agency. I went to resign, and the head of the department who'd given me my first job, God bless him, I'm not sure I would have given my 21-year-old self a job. He said, it's disappointing, give me 48 hours. And when he came back and he said, look, there's a need for someone to go and do a short-term assignment in our new Portuguese office. They just bought a Portuguese agency. And then after that, there's interest in Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Bangkok. So, and in the end, as I go back, I opted for Hong Kong because I thought it would be the easiest, because I had this delusion about what Hong Kong was.
Sure.
And that's how it happened. And at the time, being 23, 24, having not really traveled very much, I was like, okay, what's the worst?
Right.
What's the worst that can happen here?
They're going to buy my plane ticket and put me up, and I get to have an experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that how the world changes. I remember I carried 2 bags and shipped 1 box, and that was my life.
Wow.
And I think when we moved to Australia, I lost count of the boxes and trucks and things. So,
Well, things have changed, and I'm sure your Irish mother was very happy that you do have 2 children now. So a little bit of settling right there, right? Settling down.
Very settled.
Yes, very settled, very settled. So moving around to all these places, some of which you moved with your children.
Yeah, I mean, the kids are 11 and 12. So, the first few moves when they were born here in New York.
Okay.
And then actually I went back to Europe for a year before moving to Australia. The first 2 moves, they were really hand luggage. They were, I think when we moved from the US, they were 6 months old and, 1.5.
Yeah.
When we moved to Australia, they were 2 and 3, something like that. And, at that point, you just pick them up, you put them down as long as they're with you.
Right. That's home to them.
Yeah. I mean, when we moved from Australia back to Europe, it was more challenging because by that point they developed things like opinions and friends, and that was more challenging.
Yeah,
but they're very well settled now in Spain. One of my great regrets in life, despite moving around the world, is I do not have a gift for languages. My Spanish is improving, but it will never be where I'd like it to be.
Yeah.
But the boys now, because of their Dutch mother, living in Spain, learning Spanish and Catalan, plus German and French, so they'll end up with 4 or 5 languages without really,
Trying.
yes, they're going to have to
Of
think
course they're
about
trying,
it.
yes.
But they're learning it, on football pitches and in playgrounds.
Right.
Probably some of
Real language as opposed to
real
textbook
language. I mean, words that you'd really rather they didn't have. But,
words that you're Googling and going, oh, you shouldn't be saying that.
No, but it's all good. So they're well sold.
Yeah. Do they have Aussie accents?
They do not. I'm actually not completely clear what kind of accents they have.
Okay. They must have like really international.
Yeah, I honestly, I'm not sure. People sometimes think they've got a US accent. The little one used to have an Aussie accent. Now it's all a bit mixed up. It's all a bit mixed
Very
up.
cool. Very cool. You all know that creating a strong brand is about so much more than just a logo or a color palette. It defines who you are to your guest. That's why I love working with Lodgify. Their platform helps short-term rental hosts and boutique hotel operators put their brand front and center. Customize a direct booking website that looks and feels like you, not just another cookie-cutter listing. Plus, Lodgify makes it easy to centralize your business needs, managing guest communication, bookings, listing updates, and more, all in one place. From now until the end of September, Lodgify is offering up to 45% off their yearly and bi-yearly professional and ultimate plans. Visit Lodgify.com and use code SWEETVIP, that's SWEET, SUITE VIP, to take advantage of this incredible offer. You mentioned you started your career working in advertising and communications, and throughout your career, and we'll talk about this next, you've held some like really, really big marketing roles, and now you're CEO. And I think that's really inspiring to people like myself in marketing and comms, because so often we see that the CEO comes from an ops background or a finance background. So what is it that you think, what's some advice can you give to us marketers and communicators to help us get the top job one day too?
Look, I think it to some degree doesn't matter where you started your career or what you're doing, because at a certain point it's really about transferable skills. And my sense is the most important transferable skill is being able to build teams and manage teams. And so whether you started building teams in an advertising agency or on the marketing side, you can build teams and manage people and connect across any part of the business. Look, I did evolve. I mean, from if you think about my time at Nike, for instance, I mean, it was more of a pure brand marketing role. It was very communications, sponsorship, comms led. Moving to Starwood was a real eye opener, because it became about the whole experience, the whole customer experience, guest experience, the design, the architecture, the service culture, distribution before travel, loyalty after travel. And so it was a much, much wider landscape to work on, bringing together people with very, very different skills. And of course, connecting into the operational side of the business. Because the reality is, in the hotel business, the truth of the experience lives in the hotel stay. The truth of the brand, lives in the hotel stay.
Yeah, you can have the best marketing, collateral, advertising, but if it doesn't deliver,
absolutely
you're not coming back.
And so you have to work closely on the operations side. Look, I remember when I was moving on from Starwood, thinking, go back into the brand side of things, brand marketing side of things. And I was a little bit worried because, having been out of that for some time, I thought, how are people going to look on the hotel industry? Because it's not that they do often leading advertising campaigns or communications campaigns. And the reality was that something had changed. Everyone I spoke to was actually less interested in that sort of classic Nike marketing background and more interested in guest experience, because every business was really starting to think about customer experience. And in fact, the reason I landed in Australia and worked with the biggest retail group in Australia was they were looking for someone with hotel hospitality experience to build their brand.
Right.
So I think by giving yourself different experiences in different industries, different businesses, different geographies, obviously, you learn how to hopefully work well with different people, pull people together. And I believe that's a transferable skill that you can take into the C-suite or CEO role. I mean, the reality, I think, always is I'm surrounded by people, and I've always been surrounded by people who know their area much better than I do. And you need to have some level of respect for that.
Yeah.
Particularly in the hospitality business, I know when I joined Starwood, I had a learning curve, and the respect that I developed for the operations people, because they're the real deliverers of the brand, the real deliverers of the experience. And most of the people I dealt with, the general managers, the regionals, whatever, they'd forgotten more about hospitality than I was ever going to know.
Yeah.
So I had to figure out, what is it new that I can hopefully bring to the table and move us forward.
Yeah, I felt that in Starwood as well. I had come from outside of the industry as well, and I needed to learn the industry. But what I felt was so evident at headquarters was that we all really knew we were here because of the hotels. It was not the hotel's bow to corporate. It was almost corporate bows to the hotels, because that's not only where our money is being made, but where the guest experience is actually like the rubber meets the road.
Look, I think one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given was by, he was the leader of Europe at the time, a guy called Roland Voss, who's very well known in the industry. We were doing a lot of work of really getting under the skin of who are our most valuable guests. Not who's the person who stayed the most nights in our program, but who's the most profitable. And we were coming up with programs to recognize our most valuable, most profitable guests. And Roland gave me the piece of advice. He said, look, don't worry too much about building out programs. Just tell us who they are. If you tell us who the guests are, our most valuable guests, leave it to us. We know how to deliver great experience. And it proved to be true. If you try and sort of do too many standard operating procedures and programs, it can start to become inauthentic. Whereas if you give the operators, hey, here's the most important, most profitable guests we got coming in, they'll figure out how to deliver it.
Yeah. Speaking of Starwood, in preparing for this conversation today, I was doing a little Google digging, and I found a presentation that you gave at Skift Global Forum back in 2014, which the Skift team has told me, I believe, is the first ever Skift Global Forum. This is 11 years ago now, which is quite crazy to say. The title of your talk was The Future of Travel, and it mapped out a hypothetical trip to Rio that you would take in the far off year of 2020.
2020, yeah.
I mean, some parts of that itinerary might have been shaken up, but you never know.
Yeah.
I'll also link the video in the show notes if anyone wants to take a look at that. But not only did a lot of your predictions come true, there were a few things that really stood out to me. And one was you opened with humor, and you really weaved that throughout your presentation. Two, even though this is 11 years ago now, the deck, the graphics, the visuals, everything about it was excellent. It was really, really good. And third, you used storytelling to convey really complex ideas. And those qualities, storytelling, humor, beautiful visuals, to me feel like hallmarks of Starwood. It's something that I saw throughout the company, throughout my time there. Do you feel like that was something the company proactively taught and refined, or did it just attract people who also thought that was important?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure whether it was unique, to Starwood, but certainly the culture evolved over time, and I think it started to some degree at the top. I think particularly Fritz during those times, sort of opened up and tried to bring the organization together. I think, look, my approach to this is, and I know it's a bit of a cliche, but it's, take what you do seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously. Look, there's a lot of stress on a day-to-day basis in any business, and you need to find some level of lightness. And at the same time, working in the business that we work in the international travel business, I mean, it's a really exciting, interesting business, and we should be having fun in that business. I've been fortunate in life that I have three great passions, sport, travel, and music. And I got to work for what I think is the best sports company in the world in Nike. I've been able to work for two great international travel companies in Starwood and Iberostar. Sadly, I don't think I'm going to be invited.
Maybe you'll become a rock star.
I don't think I'm getting on stage anymore, but 2 out of 3 is
anymore.
Anymore.
Where you at? Do you have some musical talents?
No, I'm zero.
Oh,
zero.
okay. Karaoke?
No comment. Someone's got video. Someone's got video somewhere from a leaving party.
Yes.
But look, in terms of that piece that I know well, I know exactly when it was because my youngest son was born 4 or 5 weeks before that, and so that was the first time. It's the first time I'd had a night out.
Yes.
I was very happy to sleep in the city. I remember
that was the joke you opened with. You said, "I'm so glad I had this first slot because I had to stay overnight, so it's the best night of sleep I've gotten in 4 or 5 weeks."
Exactly, and I think I was flying out directly afterwards. But the genesis of that presentation. Sorry to Skift, it wasn't done specifically for Skift. The genesis of that presentation was actually about 3 years earlier, and it was for a global leadership meeting at Starwood with our top 100 or 200 people, and it was really about one of the changes we were trying to make. As right now everyone's asset light, but we were moving from that idea of hotel companies owning bricks and mortar to this idea of owning the sort of the hearts and minds of customers. Sure. And one of the observations that I had or we had was that within the business, we talked a lot about the guest, quite rightly. But the reality is that even our most frequent guests, some stayed 50 nights a year, 100 nights a year, but they were actually living, functioning human beings 365 days a year.
Right.
And they didn't park all of the experiences, all of the sort of macro trends that they were feeling when they came to the hotel door. At that time, small, obvious example was customers would often say, "Hey, I can go into Starbucks and get free Wi-Fi, but I come and I stay at a luxury hotel where I'm spending $7,000, $8,000 a night, and you want $30 a night for Wi-Fi." Now, we could rationally explain to them why it was different,
right? And
they didn't care,
right?
And so the reason we put that together was actually to challenge the way kind of we were doing things, and to think differently about what does the next iteration of guest experience and customer experience look like. And it was also to really get operators on side, because I had a learning curve, as I said when I joined. Without having your general managers, your key movers and shakers on the front line on board, you're not going to move anything forward.
No.
The first time I did a presentation like this, thinking about getting things wrong, was at the previous global leadership meeting, which was in Beijing, and I was asked to actually, for the first time, talk to macro trends. And I put together something which I thought was really interesting. It talked about technology. It talked about the democratization of design. It talked about wellness. It talked about an evolving focus on all things sustainable. And this was 2009, so going back 16 years. As with all conferences, at the end, 100 people were asked, what did you think of the presentations?
Yeah.
And I was a little disheartened, should we say, probably more than disheartened, because the feedback at the end was, I think a third of people, and I'll be generous to myself, a third of people said, that's really interesting. We never really look outside our industry. A third of people said that had nothing to do with our business. We don't understand. And then a third of people were a bit sharper even than that. And I recognized that we needed to put these trends into the context of our actual business.
I see.
And so, but also get some of our key operators on board.
Right.
Because we had some really, incredibly creative people on the brand side.
Yeah.
A character like Ava Ziegler, who you probably remember very well, who was just, crazy creative, full of energy, but from outside the business.
Yeah.
But then I realized that, hey, we could take that kind of level of creativity and challenge and put it together with, really open-minded general managers. And we found them. There was people out there saying, I really want to try some of this stuff, and without, naming too many names. They were from all around the world. There was Sandra Borman, who was in London at the Meridian. There was a guy called Ralph Stressing over in Bangkok. One of your previous guests, Richard Breckelmans, was in Barcelona. And what I learned was that when you got your general manager, your operators to try some new and unusual things, and they saw positive results, and they told their peers and colleagues who they went to the same hotel schools with and who'd grown up with, that's when you got the momentum.
Yeah.
So it was, it wasn't just a a reach into the dark, me trying to play futurologist.
Yeah.
It was like, hey, how can we, really bring brand creativity and operations together to sort of move us forward? And some of it's worked out. I mean, it seems obvious now.
Yeah.
The Skift presentation was a much shorter version of the longer presentation.
Yeah.
And there was a few things in the longer presentation that were really, really out there
Okay.
that haven't come to pass. We're not yet
Not
3D
yet.
we're not yet 3D printing running shoes for people if they forget them on their journeys. But
Right.
it was a fun exercise. Look, in storytelling, you asked about storytelling. I think it's really about sales, isn't it? I mean, packaging, presentation, how you talk internally was something that I really learned at Nike. I give Nike a lot of credit. When I joined the company, the first internal meeting I went to, I was like, what the actual hell's going on here? It was multimedia, hugely visual, a lot of videos, people who were speaking, apparently, with no notes, from the heart.
Sure.
But it was all brilliantly put together, really stage managed and run, because as a brand, they recognized that everything communicates, and that the way you talk about your brand and your business internally will bleed out into how you talk externally.
Yeah.
So if you invest time and effort and money in how you talk to yourselves, that quality will translate. And if you talk to each other maybe in a less considered, less integrated way,
Right.
that will also seep
In
out.
a cost-cutting way.
Yeah, that will also seep out. So that was a great learning for me from Nike, is that how you talk to each other about your brand and your business is as important as how you talk externally.
Yeah.
And that's why probably a lot of effort put into presentations.
Yeah, because everything you just said about your experience at Nike, that was my experience at Starwood, and seeing those internal presentations with the multimedia, with, like you said, spokespeople who are super talented, who seemed like they were just coming up with these ideas last minute, happened to be supported by beautiful visuals. And two things really stood out from what you were saying too. One is that presentation for Skift started at an internal meeting,
absolutely.
right? And that's exactly your point right there, is like, this was created for our team, versus a lot of companies will say, oh, I'll give the bells and whistles to the media partner, but not to my internal team. And then secondly, you had talked about the 1 to 2/3 of people who didn't like the first presentation. You could have just been like, well, they don't know what they're talking about, and my presentation was great, and the third of people who got it, they can stay and everybody else is out.
Yeah.
But you took a bit of like that radical ownership of saying, okay, well, how can I improve it? And what is their actual point, so that you can make it that much better the next time?
Yeah, look, and I think part of it was that I was still on a learning curve. And as I said, getting to understand the business, getting to understand how different it was. I mean, clearly operationally driven, but operationally driven, from from tip to toe.
Yeah.
And figuring out ways of building bridges with the senior operations people, the general managers, so that you didn't seem like an outsider to the business, but you were someone who wanted to learn and wanted to support.
Yeah.
So.
The next time you're traveling or celebrating an important occasion, book a Flytographer photo shoot. They make it easy to capture memories by connecting you with hand-picked professional photographers in over 350 destinations around the world. I should know. Capturing memories with family and friends is super important to me, and I've booked Flytographers from Maine to Paris to London. A Flytographer shoot is an essential part of every trip I plan. They also have an incredible affiliate and travel advisor program. Add a photo shoot to your customer's next itinerary and earn 10% commission. Visit flytographer.com/sweet success for $25 off your first shoot, or to sign up as an affiliate or travel advisor. That's FLYTOGRAPHER.com/sweet, like hotel suite, success.
You are an incredible public speaker. That also came through to me watching that presentation and having seen you present as well. You mentioned watching people at Nike do that. Did you learn that skill there, or is it something that's always come really naturally to you?
Look, I enjoy presenting.
Yeah.
But a lot of work goes into it. It's not a natural thing. So when it comes to big presentations like that, I mean, you come from a communications background. I'm sure you've written a lot of presentations and speeches, for various people.
Yeah.
It's actually not a control freak thing. I always prepare all of my own presentations. If there's a script, I write the script. For two reasons. One, you kind of need it to be in your voice so that it sounds authentic. And two, by preparing it yourself, thinking it through, it gives you that level of confidence that you can deliver. But it's also, I mean, I've shared this advice a lot of the time. I'm always nervous when I have to stand on a stage in front of people.
Even still?
Yeah, because you should be a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, that gives you a little bit of edge to deliver.
So what do you do to calm the nerves?
I just kick into it, and then once you kick in, it's fine. But I think you need a little bit of that. I mean, it's a little bit like my older boy's now at the age where he's starting to do more practice exams, and I say to him, you need to be nervous going into that exam, because if you're not nervous, you won't have the adrenaline to get going.
Yeah.
But I do think a large part of leading big teams, leading big groups is storytelling. And I think we talk a lot, and we'll come back to this, I'm sure, later in terms of technology. I mean, this conference, I think, 50% of the sessions have had AI reference in the title.
Yes.
But the human connection, being able to get people to kind of align and understand what it is we're trying to achieve, you need to think about messaging, you need to think about presentation, you need to engage.
Yeah.
So,
well, as I mentioned, in 2014, you gave predictions for the future of travel. So now here we are, Skift Global Forum 2025. If you were predicting 11 years from now, are we 3D printing the shoes finally?
Yeah. Look, you know what? I'll probably step back from talking about specifics. 11 years from now, I don't even want to think about how old I will be. But sure, technology is going to continue to evolve. I mean, in that think piece, whatever we want to call it, the 2020, we talked a lot about sort of social networks and communities, etc., which, of course, today seems like, of course, but at the time, some of it seemed a little bit out there.
Yeah.
I think social media particularly is going to continue to be, both an influencer in driving direction of travel, but also a transaction platform. We talked just now about AI. I mean, I'm not clear on, where that's going to take us, but it's clearly going to, I think, accelerate that direction of recommending destinations, of recommending experiences, which is going to help customers, guests to make choices. But I think on the AI side, I'm almost as interested in what I'll call the less sexy stuff, which is how can this help us in terms of solving operational problems? In my role over in Australia, by happen chance in that business, we ended up, we were in the retail destination business, but as a side effect of that, we were the biggest operators of car parks in Australia and New Zealand. And our number one customer complaint was around car parking. And I won't go into the minutiae of the details, but a lot of it was to do with reading the license plates when people were coming in, going out. And we were really struggling. And we worked with Melbourne University, who were doing early LLM work. And they helped us really come up with solutions that closed that gap, taking us from 10% of failure of car parks down to 0.5%,
wow,
which had a huge impact on overall customer experience. With that in place, we then started figuring out, well, how can this help us with identifying where there's a spill or someone's dropped a coffee, and we need to get cleaning solutions. And so it was helping with really, really, for want of a bit, unsexy solutions.
How was it doing that?
Through using the already installed network of cameras and teaching it to recognize, what does a spilled drink or a dropped sandwich, what does it look like? They started to be able to identify that.
Wow.
On the car parking side, it was able to, just logically think, okay, well, 6 of the 7 digits on this car are the same. because normally it would be rejected if it didn't exactly match. But it's also a blue BMW 2021. Open the gate, let them out. So I'm
it's a vanity plate, probably.
I'm as excited about the operational help that AI can deliver in areas such as cleaning, people management, etc. As what can it do in the marketing and brand and sales perspective?
I agree. I think so often we hear AI and people think, oh, it's coming for our jobs, but actually it's like, how can it empower us to do our jobs better, faster, or take away some of the more minutia jobs, like walking the floors to see if something spilled instead of just going directly to clean it up.
Look, and the reality is that wasn't having an impact on jobs. It just meant that we were actually making people more efficient, which, we had a focus in that business in retail, how we wanted to use technology. We said we want to use technology to encourage people to look up, not down. We didn't want them looking down, at their phones. And by looking up and freeing up time for our operational staff, it meant rather than running around trying to, find out where there was a problem, they were able to do much more interaction directly with our customers. And so it meant that our valuable people, our greatest asset, were able to focus on higher value customer experience as opposed to trips and spills.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I want to shift gears and talk about today, about your role at Iberostar. It's a company with almost 70 years of history in tourism and broader business origins dating back to 1877. But the company is amidst a pretty massive transformation and evolution right now. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, look, I mean, the business is, as you said, it's traced back 4 generations.
Wow.
Originally in the shoe business, actually. Mallorca was the center of shoe manufacturing for Europe until mass mechanization and the move to Asia in the 1970s. So that's the origin story. And then nearly 60 years ago, Don Miguel Fluchard really accelerated the business that his father had started in really sort of tour operations as tours started to come and more tourism was coming to Mallorca.
Yeah.
And from there, grew the business into what it is today, 32,000 rooms, 100 hotels, 13 countries, really focused on the beach resort area. And now still 100% owned by the 4th generation of the family.
Wow. And working for a family company versus working for a Nike and a Starwood, how do you see that different, or is it?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's some clear and obvious differences in that when you work for a public company, you have quarterly reporting requirements.
Yeah.
To some degree, that quarterly cadence can, it shouldn't, but sometimes it does drive decision making and maybe means you have to take shorter term decisions. In a private company, of course, you can take time to really think through what the return on investment can be and take a longer view. Look, there are pros and cons on both sides, because one of the good things about a public company is you do have to constantly evolve, constantly think, be agile. And, when you don't have that pressure, maybe things can drift a little. And as an organization, we try and get the balance with that by, even though we don't have to report, we do quarterly updates to all of our team against all of our KPIs and how we're performing, what do we need to improve, how do we need to evolve. So we're trying to kind of get that balance.
That balance, yeah. And I understand that the company has recently realigned its brand segments. You've categorized your hotels into Iberostar Waves, Iberostar Selection, and Joya by Iberostar. Can you tell us a bit about each of them, and more so, why is now the time to delineate between the 3?
Look, I think the business had evolved over time. I mean, we're really in the 4 and 5 star beach resort business, and there had always been categories to some degree, and
consumer facing or kind of known internally.
Consumer facing, in terms of we had our base brand, which was Iberostar, then we had Iberostar Selection, we had Iberostar Grand.
Okay.
We decided it was time to evolve because we maybe hadn't been as deliberate in defining, each of the segments beyond, sort of the good, better, best of Iberostar. And there was a decision that actually we really needed to think about, what is the overall guest and guest experience we're targeting with each of these sectors. What is the experience going to be? What is the service culture going to be? What's the ambience going to be? We have a very strong family-focused business. Waves is really the most sort of playful and energetic of the brands. Really family-focused, very sort of lively. My boys love going to the water parks, going to the food and beverage outlets. They're at that age now, 11 and 12, where they're just constant eating machines. And this is a fabulous, lively, playful, approachable family vacation destination. Selection, it's probably a little less on the playful side, still family, but for guests who are looking for sort of a higher level, maybe a little more serene experience. And then Joya is really, the evolution of our Iberostar Grand product, a collection of luxury destinations, luxury experience with a real focus on personal service. Not entirely, but with a real strong adult focus. So those were the kind of the general areas that we positioned, but now we're really working on, what are the memorable experiences, what are the differentiators between the brands, but also working on our design standards so that it's very, very clear that, this is a Waves, this is a Selection, and this is a Joya, which was a little bit, there was a little
commingling
crossover over time. So it's really to help our guests understand this is the offer and this is the right for me for this particular trip, because clearly people have different needs at different times. And also to help the market as we move from being a predominantly owned business into owned and managed, so that our potential owner community will really understand, okay, this is my destination.
This is the product I want.
This is the product I want. And so that's really evolved and is really embedded in the organization now.
So it's entirely owned at the moment?
No, it's around about 2/3 owned.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In the Americas, until recently, it has been 100% owned. But we've been in the managed side of the business for many, many years in Europe, and now opening up in the Americas as well.
Okay.
We've opened a new managed resort in Mexico just a couple of months ago, and we've got a number of other properties in our established markets. Mexico, we're opening owned hotels in Aruba. We're moving into new destinations such as Zanzibar, cool. And others to come, which we're working on right now.
Keeping up with online reviews across platforms is tough, but FeedCheck makes it easier by bringing all reviews from all channels into one place. In addition to tracking your own feedback, you can even monitor competitors to see how you compare. They provide deep insights into customer sentiment, trending topics, common issues, and patterns that might otherwise be overlooked. Plus, real-time alerts mean you can respond quickly before things escalate, and AI-powered suggestions help you craft better responses. So, if you want to stay ahead of your reputation, book a demo with FeedCheck at feedcheck.co/sweetsuccess or through the link in the podcast notes.
Another thing I know that's important to the company is responsible tourism. It says it focuses on caring for people and the environment. So what does that actually mean, and how do you bring that to life?
Yeah, look, a focus on responsible tourism is one of our 4 KPIs. We really, and again, it's not rocket science what our focus areas are. We lead with, we want to deliver world-class guest experience. We also want to be a place for our talent to thrive. So a real focus on employee experience, because I think we're great believers. I'm a great believer that without great employee experience, you can't have great guest experience.
Yes.
But then the third pillar is responsible tourism and leading in responsible tourism. Our belief with those three, we'll get the fourth, which is superior business performance. Responsible tourism is something that's rooted in the spirit of the family, in the spirit of the company. We're from an island. We're in the beach resort business. Without healthy oceans, without healthy beaches, we don't have a business. And frankly, leaving the business aside, without healthy oceans and healthy beaches, the world would not be such a pleasant place.
Yeah.
Our chief sustainability officer is one of the owners, Gloria Fouchard, and she's really invested a lot of time in the last few years in building up this organization. And there's a number of areas kind of we focus on. The first is really around climate mitigation. And you asked earlier about what other predictions we might have for the future. I think climate is going to be one of those realities that we're all going to have to deal with in the business. If you think about places are getting hotter, it's going to move. People are already choosing to go to cooler places. Seasonalities is extending because the way climate is changing is seasons that might have been 5-6 months are now turning into 9-10 month seasons, which is good. So climate mitigation, we've taken a really science-based approach to that. We work with an organization called SBTI, which is Science-Based Targets Initiative, and they really get you focused on how do you get to a true carbon neutral future, as opposed to an unconnected series of initiatives.
Yeah.
So green energy, modernization projects. We've been going through a lot of our older hotels and electrifying kitchens to remove the level of carbon we're putting into the atmosphere. So that focus is really important. Another area, waste reduction. So again, talking about AI to help solve problems, utilizing kind of AI solutions to reduce food waste. We've reduced food waste by 70% since 2021.
How have you used AI to do that?
There are various platforms right now which can actually analyze all of your food waste. It literally scans your food waste and tells you this is the item or the kind of produce that is being discarded.
Wow, that is so cool.
In the all-inclusive business, quite often we're running buffets.
Yeah.
So you can say, well, if this is the produce that is not getting used as much or is being discarded, we can rebalance what our offer is. But the other thing is that we actually now employ over 270 people who are focused specifically on reducing, reusing waste. So in all of our hotels, we have this reduce, reuse focus. So that's a real commitment in terms of people. But also as a private company, we can sometimes make decisions that maybe you couldn't do if it wasn't the ownership model. One that I think has been, it's really notable once you get used to staying in Iberostar hotels. A commitment was made a number of years ago to remove all single-use plastic, from all of our hotels. So, and it was controversial at the time because everyone wants their plastic bottle of water.
Yes.
We did replace it with refillable glass bottles, and so when you're in our hotels now, there is no plastic. You don't touch plastic, and it's only when you go and stay in another property that you suddenly realize the ubiquity of plastic around you. I was on holiday this summer, did a trip back in Australia across the Daintree rainforest. A rainforest is an environment you'd expect to find, real
eco-friendly properties.
Real eco-friendly properties, and I felt like I was surrounded by plastic, the whole time. So that for me has been a remarkable achievement. Ocean conservation. We've really focused on sustainable seafood. We're now at 90% responsibly sourced seafood.
Wow.
It's challenging. It's not easy. Working a lot with local fishing communities in some of our destinations. So you're giving back to the community as well. The other thing is really focusing on ocean health. So we've created 8 coral nurseries. We have 3 coral labs, which we fully fund and staff. Cool. We've created a genetic coral bank, that's really focusing on dunes, mangroves, seagrass projects. Connecting into communities, as I said, we want to do that as much as possible. We work in destinations where the community needs help in lots of ways. So whenever we can source locally, we can work with local fishermen, we do that. And all of it's underpinned, and this is very, very unusual. We have around about 30 scientists, coral scientists, oceanographers generally, on staff, manning our coral labs, working with institutions, whether it's the WTCC, United Nations, Harvard and Stanford, on creating scientific sort of reports on how we can improve. It all wraps up under what we call our Wave of Change initiative. And, it's something that we recognize that people may not choose to stay with us because of that. But once they stay and they get educated, particularly our coral labs, people spend a lot of time in the coral labs. And the net result of this is we were named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential companies in the world. We were the only Spanish company, the only hospitality company, largely driven by the real focus on sustainability. But I think it's important. Something we say a lot is that our KPI is that we want to lead in responsible tourism, but the very definition of lead is that others will follow. And we need others to follow because, yes, it's great that we've removed plastic bottles and all single-use plastic from our 100 hotels, but 100 hotels does in itself does not a revolution make. Right. And so we really want to be open source about this. We want the industry to follow.
Yeah. That's incredible, because a lot of times I feel like the sustainability initiatives are things that are happening on property and they're a bit of like a tick box. And like you were saying, having coral labs, employing scientists, these aren't things that are necessarily going to affect your ADR immediately, but that they're important. And therefore, they're starting to gain the recognition that might actually lead to brand loyalty at a certain point too.
Yeah, look, and again, we would hope so, but that's not the principal reason.
That's not the goal.
That's not the goal.
The goal is it's the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do. And ultimately, if we don't protect the oceans,
we don't have properties.
We don't have properties, whether it's 20, 30, 40 years from now.
Right.
So a lot of risk mitigation, making sure we maintain beaches. I mean, you're seeing, coastal erosion in lots of our areas. You're seeing issues around seagrass, which is now, because of climatic change, wave pattern changes, we're seeing much heavier seagrass season. So we're kind of working on mitigation for that to help ourselves, clearly, but to help the whole industry,
the world.
And frankly,
yeah,
absolutely.
Phil, I want to ask you the last 3 questions that I ask every guest. And the first one is, what was the best hospitality experience you've ever had?
I'm going to connect to your 3 questions if you don't mind.
Oh, okay. You already know. So we're going to ask the best, the worst, and what does it mean to you and who's doing it well?
Yeah, look, I'm going to put them all together.
Of course, you're a storyteller.
No, but I said it because we talk a lot about technology, AI technology, but to me, it all comes back down to human connection. And it's really sort of an anecdote that brought this home to me. When we first moved to New York, I'd been coming in and out of New York for many years on business, and I think I had a New York friend who'd introduced me to a restaurant on Grand Street, which was kind of pretty lively. I kind of really liked it, but I was only ever there like once a year,
right?
So it was a destination. And I moved here, and together with Ariella, my wife, we were like, I'm going to take you to, I won't name the name because it's still going. We'll go to this restaurant. I really like it. And so we went, and it was very good, and the food was good. And because we liked it, we went back, and we probably went back 5 or 6 times in, a couple of months. Didn't really know the city. But on the 5th or 6th time, we had exactly the same person serving us every single time. And he never acknowledged us. He never said, "Good to see you again. Hey,
welcome back.
Welcome back.
Do you want your usual?"
Do you want your usual? And then someone, recommended another restaurant, which was not far away. It was called Cercle Rouge. It was down on that part of Tribeca. We went in there, we tried it. It wasn't as glitzy. It probably wasn't as cool. But the food was very good. And it was probably 6 or 8 weeks later. We said, let's go back there. We've got some friends in. And we walked in and they welcomed us back. And they said, hey, great to see you. How have you been? And there was that kind of human touch. And I think in the way we work in the world today, where we're all sort of online 24/7, those small human connections make a big deal. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just a pathetic individual who likes to be recognized.
I am exactly the same way. I feel this way about my coffee shop. So I have one coffee shop that's like a block from my home and another one that's about 5 blocks from my home. The one that's 5 blocks away makes better coffee. It does.
Yeah.
But every time I go in there, they treat me like it's my first time in there, versus the other coffee shop, which coffee is not as good. He's saying, how are you? How's the little one? How was your birthday? All those little things. And I will continue to go back there and spend my money and tip him more because he makes that hospitable experience.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I mean, it does pay back in the business, because I think over the 7 years I was here, that became my go-to place, not just personally, but if we had people in town. I'm not sure how many meals and groups I took to that place, but it was all because of that. Was the food better or worse? It was probably equal. Was the ambience better or worse? It was probably worse. It wasn't as well designed, but that human interaction, that interest, and that for me, to answer the third question, is the heart of it. If you can, create simple human connection, if you can display warmth, you display interest in people, even if it's the first time you're seeing them.
Right.
And one of the things that I, like most about the business I'm in now is that we're almost 100% vacation business. So people are paying for it themselves. They're really, really vested in having a good time. And one of the comments I made after my first sort of 90 days, I visited 50 or 60 of our hotels. I made a comment which was genuine. I went back and I said, I have seen more happy, smiling faces in our resorts than maybe I saw in 7 years going to some of the world's some of the world's leading resorts. And I thought about it. And I thought, a lot of our guests, this is their own money. They're vested. They may not be the most frequent travelers. They're vested in having a good time and watching the way our staff really interact, particularly with the families. I mean, that for me is kind of the difference in our business and the difference in hospitality. And, you can see people in amazing locations as you go around the world, sometimes looking pretty miserable. And so, maybe that's why White Lotus has been such a hit, because you see all of this. But the human touch, if it's missing, I don't think you deliver hospitality. If it's there, you're on a foundation.
Yeah. Phil, this has been so much fun. Thank you for joining me today for our first ever in-person episode.
Well, it's a bit scary. It's the first one, but thank you very much. Always a pleasure to help.
All right, everyone. It's time for today's sweet summary, where I break down the key insights and actionable takeaways from today's conversation. For our first ever in-person episode of Sweet Success, it's fitting that Phil was my guest, not just because of the full circle moment with him presenting here at Skift Global Forum 11 years ago, but because his story embodies the global perspective that defines modern hospitality today. Phil's career and his largely expat life is proof that transferable skills are everything. It's what allowed him to thrive while living in 7 different countries across 4 continents, even though he's the first to admit that he's not great at languages. It's what allowed him to shift industries, moving from advertising to sport to hospitality to retail. And it's what enabled him to evolve personally, from a man whose mom would pester him about settling down to a devoted partner and dad to 2 boys. He also spoke about the importance of packaging. This is a lesson that was ingrained in me from a young age. My mom was known to say, it's all in the presentation, whether she was referring to the way I assembled a book report or how I framed an argument to a friend. Phil saw its impact firsthand at Nike, blown away by the power of an immersive multimedia presentation put together for the company's internal team, not just for external audiences. He prioritizes putting that time, energy, effort, and money into his team at Iberostar because he knows that will translate to the guests. And while technology and AI are undeniably shaping the future, Phil emphasized that at the end of the day, it all comes down to guest experience. As he reminded us, some of our most loyal guests may stay 50 or even 100 nights a year, but they're still whole people all the time, all 365 days a year. Which means we can't afford to see them only through the narrow, simplified lens of a hotel guest or a shoe buyer. We have to think about the full picture of their lives and how the moments we create fit into that. As Phil put it so well, the goal is not to make people look down at their phones more, but rather to encourage them to look up. And that concludes another episode of Sweet Success. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. We all know how important those 5-star reviews are. I also want to say a massive thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in. It means the absolute world to me. And I'd love to hear from you. If you have ideas for future guests, new topics to cover, or even just want to say hi, don't be shy. Message me through our website, sweetsuccesspodcast.com, or on social media at Sweet Success Podcast. That's sweet like hotel suite. Once again, I'm your host, Katie Cline, and I'm super excited to see you all next week.